Good afternoon. We're thrilled to be presenting a timely panel entitled Pro Bono Services in the Time of COVID-19, sponsored by the ABA Standing Committee on Pro Bono and Public Service and the Section of Civil Rights and Social Justice. This panel is one of many in a series of rapid response webinars on the COVID-19 pandemic. We are actively planning additional COVID-19 programming on a variety of issues, so please visit americanbar.org/CRSJ for updates on these programs. Before we go into our program and how it will work today, I'd like to introduce Judy Perry-Martinez, President of the American Bar Association, for a few remarks.
Thank you, Marissa, and good afternoon to all of you. I'm delighted to be with you and to know that we're all looking forward to hearing from this remarkable panel who's assembled in order to share their knowledge and expertise about pro bono in general and how to operate in this pandemic. This is, as Marissa said, one in a series of webinars that the ABA Civil Rights and Social Justice section has been putting on, and their partnership today with the ABA Standing Committee on Pro Bono, as well as with other co-sponsors, is really the way that the ABA is operating in and among these new challenges. We know that the pandemic has brought a lot of suffering, a lot of pain, and a lot of challenges to how so many economic sectors are about doing their work. But we also know that it has brought challenges to the legal sector and particularly to our pro bono work. But that won't stop us from doing what's necessary. And we have some really creative and thoughtful individuals who will share with you how they are going about reaching those who are in need and making sure that access to justice is a reality for all the people who are facing challenges as a result of the pandemic. The ABA is working really hard to make sure that we are supporting our lawyers, our members, as well as the public. You may know that we stood up in the early days of the shelter-in-place orders, a new task force, the ABA Task Force on Legal Needs arising out of the 2020 pandemic, which is addressing not only the emerging issues that are coming forth as a result of the pandemic, but also the ones that we were not paying close enough attention to, that we need to do more about as a legal profession in order to make sure, again, that people's legal needs are addressed so that they can have access to what they need in terms of shelter and food and clothing and sustenance and more. And what we know is that because of individuals like you who care so much about these issues, that we'll keep going strong. And so I urge you to be with us within the ABA, to join us if you have not done so before, and to look and be a part of this important community that is just making new ways of going about the important work that we do. Resiliency is what's critically essential to the work of lawyers these days, and it's no more important than in the pro bono arena. So I'll turn it back over to Marissa and want to, before I do so, thank the entirety of the panelists who are taking time out from their busy days to share their knowledge and expertise with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. During today's program, we encourage you to ask questions of our panelists. As an attendee, you should see a control panel with controls such as audio options, chat, raise hand, and Q&A. For the purposes of this webinar, we ask that you submit your questions through the Q&A, not the chat function. If you do not see these controls, please ensure your screen is not idle. We will address questions at the end of the panel. We will be sharing a recording of this program to everyone who is registered so that you can share it widely with your networks. And with that, we're thrilled to bring you today's program entitled Pro Bono Services in the Time of COVID-19. Our panelists today are Michael Bergmann, Executive Director of the Public Interest Law Initiative, Kurt Denk, Pro Bono Counsel with the City Bar Justice Center, Stephen Schulman, Pro Bono Partner with AKIN, GUMP, STRAUSS, HAUER, and FELD, LLP, and Co-President of the Association of Pro Bono Counsel, and Cheryl Zelensky, Chief Counsel with the ABA Standing Committee on Pro Bono and Public Service, and the Director of the ABA Center for Pro Bono. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Cheryl to tell us a little bit about the Center for Pro Bono and the Standing Committee.
Thank you so much, Marissa, and thank you to the section on civil rights and social justice for inviting us to be part of their webinar series and for highlighting the critical issue of pro bono legal services to low-income persons. And thank you, Judy, for that wonderful introduction of our webinar today. And last of all, thank you to our fantastic panelists who are going to share a lot of great information and experience and knowledge with us all today. The Standing Committee on Pro Bono and Public Service and the Center for Pro Bono are pleased to be the ABA's resources on pro bono legal services to low-income persons in civil matters. So I will talk a little bit generally about the resources that the ABA and the committee offers, and then we'll turn it over to our other panelists to talk about their direct experiences with pro bono during this pandemic and what they anticipate seeing in the future as we look at legal issues that will arise. First of all, I do want to encourage everyone to visit the website of the ABA's task force that Judy mentioned earlier. The task force's website collects a variety of resources on pandemic-related legal issues, from practice tools and legal work to pro bono issues, to the latest updates on bar exams scheduled for July, to court rule changes, and a great deal of additional information. So in the context of providing pro bono legal services, there are a lot of great resources on that website that are critical to those who are looking to volunteer and who are managing volunteers, because it's important to know, for example, whether people will be taking bar exams in July and what that will do in terms of their ability to volunteer for pro bono legal services. I also invite you all to visit the Center for Pro Bono's COVID-related page. That page is gathering specific resources on pro bono and the pandemic. For example, we have our information about our drop-in call series, which is a series of weekly calls. As the name suggests, you can just drop in, no reservations, no registration required, to discuss issues that you're encountering in pro bono management during this time period. We encourage you to bring your questions and your challenges, as well as your solutions that you have implemented or are thinking about implementing in your community to provide pro bono legal services to these calls. We don't have one this week because we're doing this webinar today, but we will resume our calls next week, and the information will be on that web page for you to look at and get onto your calendar. We are looking forward to having conversations on those calls with all of you about how you anticipate addressing pro bono in the future, and how you anticipate the legal needs of our clients changing in the future. Our panelists today will talk a little bit about those particular topics. Our webpage, in addition to the drop-in calls, offers a link to ABA Free Legal Answers, which is both a source of legal advice and an opportunity to volunteer. Mr. Bergmann will be talking about that after I conclude my remarks. We also have models of pro bono that are taking place across the country, from clinics for small businesses to eviction clinics online and more. So if you're looking for a way to provide pro bono legal services in your community at this time, there are resources there for you to emulate and adapt to your community. We also have links to CLE trainings from the ABA and from other organizations that are specific to the pandemic to assist those who are looking to volunteer pro bono services during this time in a new area of law to them. You can get substantive training both from within the ABA, as I mentioned, and there are other specific CLEs offered by our pro bono colleagues around the country that we encourage you to participate in if you're looking for an opportunity to volunteer. We also have on our website pro bono management resources. We know that this is a challenging time for those of you who are managing pro bono programs, and so we want to offer you resources from around the country on how to manage your program, whether that's how to manage your employees remotely or how to assess the security of your online systems. Every resource that we come across, we try to collect on that page so that you can better do your job in managing your pro bono organization. Of course, the Center for Pro Bono offers a number of resources, not only during the pandemic, but throughout the year, and those are always available online. We have a knowledge center of documents related to pro bono that if you're looking to create, for example, an intake form or an agreement between your volunteer attorneys and the clients, those documents are all there online. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can look at the documents and use those as a base for what you're working on. And we encourage you to take a look at those. If you cannot find something that you're looking for, we encourage you to contact us through the website. Marissa and I and our other colleagues at the ABA stand by to help you all and help you work effectively and efficiently during this time. We also have information on the website substantively about recruiting volunteers, providing recognition to volunteers, and other aspects of managing pro bono organizations and their operations. So with that, I will turn it over to someone who manages pro bono volunteers on a daily basis. My dear friend and colleague, Mr. Bergmann, will help us learn about free legal answers and other aspects of his work in pro bono.
Thanks, Cheryl, and hello to everyone. As Cheryl said, my name is Michael Bergmann, and I'm the Executive Director of PILI, the Public Interest Law Initiative. We're located in Chicago, here in Illinois, and our mission is to engage, inspire, and empower those advancing equal access to justice. PILI started in 1977, first with a law student internship program, which we still operate today, and through which we fund interns working at Illinois public interest law organizations, either for a semester or for the summer. A few years after we got started, we then added a graduate fellowship program to place incoming law firm associates at Illinois public interest law organizations to work between graduation and joining the law firm. PILI provides supplemental educational, social, and professional development programming to those interns and fellows while also ensuring that they receive quality supervision. Between the internship program and fellowship program, we've had more than 4,000 former interns and fellows who make up PILI's alumni network. In 1999, we launched a pro bono program that was initially focused on helping law firms and corporations in Chicago to develop and grow their pro bono programs. It was ultimately through that program, our pro bono program, that PILI grew into a statewide organization over the last decade, working collaboratively to expand and enhance pro bono across Illinois, while also filling gaps in the delivery of legal services through innovative pro bono opportunities. One such opportunity that we've been working on is Illinois Free Legal Answers, for which PILI is the statewide administrator since August of 2019. So in case you're not aware, I wanted to spend a few moments telling you a little bit about what Free Legal Answers is and its history. Free Legal Answers is a secure website where qualified users can post their civil legal questions. Volunteer attorneys then come along to the site and log in at their convenience, select the type of question or questions that they want to answer, and provide information and basic legal advice. This is a really fantastic limited scope or bite-sized opportunity for attorneys. Users are then emailed when their question receives a response, and they are able to log back into the website to read and respond to the attorney's response. The attorney also has the ability to decide whether to conclude the discussion with the answer of that question or to open up an exchange through the system between the attorney and the client, either to get more information or for the client to ask a follow-up question. The great thing about this bite-sized opportunity is that it can be done from anywhere. All you need is internet access and a device to connect to the website, and you're on and able to answer questions anytime, anywhere. The ABA provides the platform for Free Legal Answers, national support, and malpractice coverage for all Free Legal Answer volunteers. Each state then has a state administrator. In Illinois, it's PILI, which is responsible for overseeing the day-to-day operations of the site, including volunteer recruitment, management, and training. This all started in about 2011 with Online Tennessee Justice, which developed the platform backed by the law firm of Baker Donaldson. In 2015, the ABA elevated the platform to a national level by adopting it in a cloud-based version based on that model in Tennessee. In 2017, we launched Illinois Free Legal Answers here, and in 2020, 42 jurisdictions are now participating in Free Legal Answers, with 33 already online. So let me tell you a little bit about some of what we've been doing here in Illinois with Free Legal Answers. Since 2016, when it was launched, 318 lawyers have answered 4,820 civil legal questions. In 2019, 116 volunteer lawyers logged on and answered 1,334 questions. In 2020, year to date, we've had 108 volunteers log on and answer 697 questions. The typical areas where we see questions in the highest numbers are pretty similar to what we see across legal aid in general. For us, we categorize family, safety, divorce, and custody together, and that represents currently 47% of the questions that have been asked. Second, housing, renting, and homelessness, which accounts for 19%. Then money, debt, and consumer protection, which accounts for 13%. Work and employment and unemployment, 6%, and civil, constitutional rights and discrimination, 6%. So what have we been doing since we took over the site? We've been promoting the site and recruiting new volunteers. We've been partnering with law firms and corporations to have monthly clinics. We've been partnering with state law schools to have clinics that connect with either local law firms or with their alumni. We've been partnering with the Illinois State Bar Association to have a Illinois Free Legal Answers clinic around the state on or around Law Day each year. And we have a regular cadre of volunteers who answer questions on their own, logging into the site whenever it's convenient for them. But what we've found to be the most successful for us is to actually organize these clinics where folks get together in the same place and they answer questions together. It in effect ends up being a bit of a social opportunity as well as kind of a working together crowdsourcing opportunity. We've had an 81% answer rate since we took over, with PILI staff contacting those with questions that are older than 30 days, either to try to provide some information to the person asking or to let them know that at this point, we can't get somebody to answer their question and we're going to go ahead and withdraw that question for them at that time. So in March, when the COVID crisis really was taking foot and when Illinois was looking at issuing its stay-at-home order, we saw this as a real opportunity to provide assistance to those in need while courthouses were being shuttered, and with that, court-based help desks and legal aid offices. We at PILI operate a few court-based help desks around the state, and obviously those were impacted by the shutdowns. So we were trying to figure out how we could get more help out there to those in need. Before the pandemic, our queue regularly had about 50 to 100 questions in it at any given time. That was without much promotion at all, thanks in part to the fact that clients get referred to the site through Illinois Legal Aid Online, which is a great resource here in Illinois for self-represented litigants. So for our part, we didn't have to do a lot of work talking to the client community to try to get them to reach out to us and ask for help through the site. Our focus was really on telling the volunteer community about this resource and engaging them and involving them with using the site. And so as we started to look at what was happening with the pandemic, we wanted to make sure that the client population did indeed know about this resource, and we were committed to doing more to promote it to the client community. But before doing that, we wanted to know that we had volunteers there at the ready to answer questions. We knew that our ability to organize clinics where we would bring groups of volunteer lawyers together was not going to be feasible. We in fact had to cancel many that we had already had planned around Law Day. And so we really wanted to make sure that people were there and they were at the ready if we needed them to answer questions when we ultimately saw the volume of questions come through increase. So we launched our COVID-19 Illinois Free Legal Answers Task Force in mid-March and called for Illinois lawyers to sign up with the task force, whether or not they were already a volunteer with Free Legal Answers, so that we knew that they were there ready and willing to help out, and so that we could communicate with them to help them in helping clients, as well as to tap into their networks to promote the system, both to volunteers as well as to the client community. 74 lawyers responded to that call within the first couple of weeks and signed up to join the task force, a mix of those who had been volunteers with Free Legal Answers, as well as many who had never volunteered or registered with the site before. In addition, another 73 volunteers signed up on their own through the site without becoming members of the task force. We have organized a page on our website that is a secure page for our volunteers, where we have information and resources for our volunteers, including a wide range of frequently asked questions and sample questions that our volunteers can use. And when we were looking at what might be coming across because of COVID-19, we decided that we wanted to also add some additional FAQs. So we were fortunate to have our friends at Sidley Austin help to prepare a wide range of new COVID-19 specific frequently asked questions that we were able to add to the site, so that our volunteers had resources when trying to answer these questions, particularly around issues that were changing quite frequently due to state and federal regulations and changes. And so that resource is available to all of our volunteers with all of that information when they sign up. We send out a weekly email to our task force members, letting them know what's going on with the site, letting them know about the activity on the site, and most importantly, letting them know how many questions are currently sitting in the queue. What we hoped would happen happens every time. The minute we send that email out, people start logging in and questions start disappearing from the queue. During the course of the task force, we've gotten down to days when there are 2 or 3 questions sitting in our queue, coming from a time, as I said, when we might have 50 to 100 questions at any given time sitting there. Yesterday, in fact, was the first day ever during the course of the time the task force has been in place that we had just over 50 questions sitting in the queue. We sent that newsletter out and it quickly fell below 50. Since Illinois issued its stay-at-home order, we've had 404 questions that have been answered so far, which represents a 50% increase over the same period as last year, when 270 questions were answered. Right now, the types of things that we're seeing are both staying the same and changing a bit. We still see family law as being the highest area of need and the highest area of questions, representing 42% of the questions during the course of the time the task force has been in place. Work and unemployment and employment issues are representing now 20%, so that has risen to number 2, having previously been at number 5. Housing, renting, and homelessness, which interestingly enough has dropped slightly to the number 3 spot from number 2, and then money, debt, consumer protection issues at 7%. As we start to kind of adjust to our new normal, we are starting to organize again virtual legal clinics and having folks come together virtually to answer questions, with us providing either an overview of the system and or some kind of a CLE training, whatever the partner that we're working with is interested in, and then volunteers from that law firm or corporation then working together to answer questions. We've had several of those now and are looking at doing several more, not only with firms and corporations, but also with local bar associations. So that's kind of the general run through of both Free Legal Answers and what we've been doing here in Illinois more generally, and around our COVID-19 Illinois Free Legal Answers Task Force. 2 other questions that kind of come up with this for those of you who may be new to it is, well, how do we know whether or not we have a conflict? This is a question that certainly gets raised quite a bit. in our state, particularly when you've got the larger law firms and corporations wanting to make sure that they are very careful about this. The ABA model rules include Model Rule 6.5. We have adopted Rule 6.5 here in Illinois, and 6.5 basically eases the conflicts requirements when it is a limited scope type of opportunity and it is provided in kind of a help desk type format, as is the case with what we're doing through this site. So 6.5 is a useful tool to try to address that issue. And the great thing is that on the Free Legal Answer site, there's a detailed explanation of the ABA's interpretation of how that rule applies and what to know with regard to that issue. The other issue that we have faced as we've expanded our work with this and seen a lot more of the larger law firms get involved is that in some firms, nothing can happen without an engagement letter. And so trying to make a way to get to that point. Obviously, doing an engagement letter with each and every person for whom you answer a question is not practical. And so what we have worked on with several firms is where the engagement letter is between the firm and PILI, and that they are volunteering through us to answer questions on a pro bono basis through the Illinois Free Legal Answers platform. And for those firms that really require an engagement letter as a checkoff along the way before any work can be done, that has seemed to address some of the issues that folks have faced in the past with having volunteers through the firm work with that. So I think that is everything that I wanted to cover. And I know that there are some questions in the queue. Marissa, do you want to help me through that?
Yeah. So one of the questions is about the monthly clinics. Could you go a bit more into how the monthly clinics are going right now? Because I know you mentioned you're doing some virtual meetups. So how is that working?
Absolutely. So we've just started this. We had one firm that had actually committed to doing a law day adjacent clinic in person before the pandemic broke out. They then went to a virtual one and did it through Zoom. We jumped in and did some training and some information about how to use the site. And then the volunteers answered questions, and it still allows kind of, I think I used the crowdsourcing expression before as a way that they can still, use each other to tap into one another and ask questions of one another and do a hypothetical and get somebody's take on what might be the right answer. And so it's worked well. Right now it's been smaller groups. And so we're looking at now greater interest in this. And so I think within the next month or two, we're gonna see several of these pop up. There's also firms and corporations that have been doing this on a very regular basis in person monthly. And with concerns, ongoing about getting together in groups, we're looking at doing more of those. So it's in the early stages and still a work in progress, but thus far they've worked well.
There's another question that I'm going to go ahead and have Cheryl take about ABA Free Legal Answers specifically. One questioner wants to know how they can make ABA Free Legal Answers available in their state. I'm not sure the state, but if you could go a little bit into just kind of how the process works for states with free legal answers.
Absolutely. So as Mike mentioned, the ABA partners with someone in each state where we make ABA Free Legal Answers available to be the state administrator for that state. And that essentially is based on our experience that pro bono is best done at a local and not necessarily a national level. So we partner with someone in each state in order for that organization and person to do outreach, as Mike said, to client populations and to attorney populations, and to work with partners throughout the state, whether they're other legal services providers or bar associations or nonprofits who serve the client populations to do the outreach in that particular state. There are states in which we have not fully launched due to the organizations we're partnering with still being in the launch stage of recruiting volunteers and doing the other back work back-end work that is necessary to get the Free Legal Answers platform up and running in each state. And there are other states in which we've not yet identified a partner for that state. So I encourage anyone who is interested in learning more about why Free Legal Answers is not yet in your state to contact me at my email address or to go to our website, abaprobono.org, which has a contact button there to submit a question, and reach out to us. We're happy to have a conversation with you because we do see the value in getting this platform into as many jurisdictions as possible. And when we launched this national platform in 2016, we had absolutely no idea that a pandemic would happen, preventing us from meeting with people face to face, and that this platform would be positioned to provide continuing legal services and advice to people until we can get to a point where, back to normal business again with pro bono legal services. So we're very grateful to be able to offer these services. And as I said, if you have a question about your state or would like to talk to me about getting it into your state, I welcome those conversations.
Thanks, Cheryl. With that, I think we'll move on to our next panelist, Kurt Denk with the City Bar Justice Center, to talk a little bit about some of what they're seeing and some of the legal issues and how they're dealing with the pandemic.
Sure. Thank you, Marissa, and thanks to everyone for joining us. So my name is Kurt Denk. I'm pro bono counsel at the City Bar Justice Center, and that is the pro bono and legal services affiliate of the New York City Bar Association. So I actually have a PowerPoint. I'm going to try to share my screen here, and hopefully that will work there. Is that working there? Okay, I see a thumbs up from Marissa. So great. So what I want to focus on are just a few of the premises that informed our response at the City Bar Justice Center, our response to the pandemic, and then some of the things that we've learned from the programs that we have built, the people that we've talked to, the attorneys we've been fortunate to work with, looking forward so that we can learn from kind of emerging best practices. So just in terms of a little bit of background, we began by leveraging our existing pro bono model. And we're a bit unique in legal services organizations and being sort of pro bono heavy. And that's a reflection of our connection to the New York City Bar Association and just historically how we developed. And then also a disaster response experience. So the City Bar was very involved after 9/11 in the legal response there. Attorneys literally lined up around the block to volunteer in some of the hurricanes in more recent years. We've been able to respond to that. So we were fortunate in having some institutional knowledge in how to kind of respond quickly. So we were able to build programs beginning in late March and launch them beginning in early April. And the thing that that really kind of sticks out to me is that to date, so we're talking about probably 6-7 weeks from the time that we had simply a framework to being able to launch these. We have recruited roughly as many volunteers for our 3 initial COVID-19 programs as we typically match in an entire year with the 12 what we call projects, which are really legal services, practice areas of the City Bar Justice Center in an entire year. So the 3 programs that we've rolled out, the first that rolled out was our COVID-19 Small Business Remote Legal Clinic. And there, our partners are Kirkland & Ellis and Lawyers for Good Government. So they actually have a national model that's rolling out in cities all over the country. And New York City was the first launch site, and we're the sponsoring legal services organization for that project. And then we also have a free life planning legal assistance project for New York City frontline healthcare workers that's built off of our existing planning and estates law project. And then the third project to roll out was a pro bono expansion of our existing free civil legal services hotline, which typically answers about 1,000 calls a month. It's the largest operation of its kind in New York. And it has traditionally not used a lot of pro bono volunteers just because the learning curve is really steep for the kind of vast number of questions that come in on the hotline, and it's a bit of a batting cage experience because you're usually live on a hotline, taking the calls in the moment. But what we did was identify topics that are specific to the pandemic that we would be able to train volunteers on, and then give them the opportunity essentially to take referrals that our staff is able to pass on after conducting an intake. So they're the programs that we've built. And let me just kind of share, the premise behind the work that we've done. Hopefully, most of you were here for the great introduction by ABA President Judy Perry Martinez at the beginning. She talked about resiliency, and it's really the same principle. So Roger Juan Maldonado, the outgoing City Bar President, and Sheila Boston, the incoming City Bar President, they wrote a piece in the New York Law Journal just about under a month ago, called "The Legal Marathon Ahead," and they focused on the fact that the pro bono response to the pandemic has to be a marathon, not just a sprint. And you'll see there a quote that I pulled out of that really excellent article that they wrote. And what we're trying to emphasize, both in terms of our own thinking as we build the 3 existing COVID-19 projects that we have up and running, and those that we're still thinking about, is that the recruitment of pro bono volunteers really needs to focus on needs that will last not just for weeks, but that are going to last for months, and unfortunately, especially here in New York City, likely years. So that the development of programming has to be prospective and not just reactive. And what I mean by that is the pro bono leaders have to imagine how the pandemic and its effects are going to play out over time. So, for example, just looking at our small business project, the initial questions, most of the questions, of course, focused on the CARES Act, the payroll protection plan and other grant and loan programs. And that was in the initial weeks. Now we're seeing a shift to there are more questions around commercial leasing. And we anticipate that in coming weeks, some of those questions will start to shift to restructuring or to bankruptcy questions. So as pro bono, response programs are built, they really need to be prospective and think about not just what the existing needs are, but what will the needs be, so that we have training materials in place and we have other structures in place, both to get volunteers up and running, but also that will be responsive to the needs that clients bring to us. And then the third point there is that robust pro bono legal services delivery is even more important now, because the pandemic it's both highlighted, and the pandemic has likely worsened the existing social inequities that we're all aware of. Particularly, this was also mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, particularly for immigrant communities and communities of color. So that, I believe, has to be front and center in the response that we put together. So that being said, what's sort of the promise? What are some of the good points that we can highlight? And I think there are at least 3. So the first is that the massive volunteer response confirms that pro bono is alive and well. I think we had questions, again, I use that image at the city bar. After 9/11, attorneys lined up around the block to help. New York City is shut down. Attorneys can't line up around the block. So there was a question, what's this going to look like? And people have really stepped up. Even in communities like New York, where the virus is very strong, and shelter in place rules are very robust, and they need to be. People really have stepped up. So the pro bono spirit in the profession is alive and well, and that's good to see. Why were people able to do that? That's the next point here, is that technology allows work to happen. And what kind of work am I talking about? You know, in the pro bono context, it's publicity, both to clients and to prospective volunteers. It's then about the matching that connects those clients to the volunteers. And then it's the delivery of actual services. That simply would not have been possible not all that long ago. If we think, you know, a pandemic of this scale, if it had, you know, erupted, say in, you know, maybe the mid 90s, you know, not that long ago, early 2000s, the technology just was not in place to allow us to do what we're doing now. So that is, that's helpful, you know, now, frankly, and we've already heard that from some of the remarks, you know, of my co-panelists. But I think it also augurs well for expanded pro bono in the future. You know, listening to Michael describe how, you know, Free Legal Answers works, a lot of really good work can happen, you know, without people being physically in the same space and physically connected. So I think our learning from the present experience, difficult as that experience is going to help us, you know, in the future to encourage people to do more pro bono. And then the third piece that I've reflected on is that the unique nature of this disaster, it's different from a hurricane, it's different from, you know, from 9/11. I mean, this disaster affects everyone. You know, it affects the people seeking legal help. It affects the lawyers themselves. You know, you can see I'm sitting in my dining room, you know, for this webinar. We're all working from home, or, you know, some people have had to go to a different location. So we're all experiencing this, and I suspect, and some of this suspicion comes from reviewing some of the initial, you know, feedback that we've seen both from clients and from pro bono attorneys who have, you know, done some of the work that we've set up, that it permits a greater level of solidarity, frankly, between the provider of pro bono and the recipient of pro bono than is usually otherwise the case. You know, that's always a bit of a danger in pro bono, is that, you know, the attorney volunteering their services is in a position of power, you know, with respect, certainly with respect to knowledge, often from a standpoint of socioeconomic status or other, you know, statuses of privilege. And that can be a barrier, frankly, in the effective delivery of legal services. And that's why things like cultural competence, cultural humility, diversity, equity, inclusion are all so important, you know, to bridge that gap. And I think in this context, maybe what we're seeing is, because this is such a scary moment, frankly, for everyone, that it can help create a little bit more of a bond between a pro bono provider and a client who they're working with. All of that being said, so that's the promise. There are very real challenges, you know, that we're seeing, and I think we need to be mindful of, again, as we're also, you know, looking ahead to the future. So, what are some of those challenges? You know, massive initial interest does not guarantee that long-term needs will be met, and that's always the challenge for people in positions like the one that I hold. It's a constant, you know, sort of battle of supply and demand, you know, between people who need services and people who are willing and able to provide them. And you risk, you know, too much excitement on the part of volunteers, maybe initially out of the gate. And then if you're not able to match clients right away, if training materials don't quite, you know, flow in the way people might expect, you risk souring, frankly, volunteers' experience. And that then, you know, presents the risk of limiting future interest, and then accordingly reducing the, you know, capacity to provide pro bono services. And I think that is perilous, in particular at the present moment, because we know that the needs are going to increase. You know, we're entering an economic crisis that is of a scale that most people alive today have never seen. We don't know how long it's going to last, how deep it's going to run. So the needs are going to increase with time, and we have to maintain that volunteer spirit that we had, you know, in March and April, you know, for the months to come. The second, you know, kind of risk that I want to talk about is that technology has its upsides. It's made all of this matching possible. It's making remote pro bono possible. But careful matching and competent training and supervision are at the heart of successful pro bono services delivery. And those processes require more than a light tech touch. You know, they require experience, they require conversation, they require thoughtfulness that a technology platform can't provide on its own. So expanding, remote pro bono in a post, COVID-19 world holds a lot of promise, but it's going to require that we devote a lot of thought, I think, to designing and calibrating the mechanisms that ensure quality control. Third point is that because the COVID-19 provider recipient solidarity, that I just talked about, should not mask the massive inequities that this pandemic has both, spotlighted and exacerbated. Positive experiences, with remote bite-sized pro bono cannot be permitted to replace a commitment to work that addresses long-term needs, and systemic problems. I'm a big believer in sort of the bite-sized pro bono model. It's a lot of what we do at the City Bar Justice Center through clinics. But any low-income or otherwise vulnerable client will tell you that their legal problems feel to them like a meal. It's not just a mouthful. And we have to make sure that the delivery of pro bono legal services, matches that. And then just the few last points that I want to make here is to reflect on professional development, because I think this is the way that we excite people and encourage people to kind of stick with this for the long term. And I believe the panelists, my co-panelists and I will be addressing this a little bit more, kind of later in the program. But, just to identify a few points here, the fact that this crisis has required attorneys to tackle new substantive topics. And what do I mean by that? No one was a CARES expert, when this began, because it didn't even exist 2 months ago. I actually looked up the date of it. It was a little surprising to me. The CARES Act is not even 2 months old. So all that experience of having to become a sort of quasi-expert in a short period of time, that's what pro bono is often about, across the board. So it underscores that sort of traditional value of pro bono, which is its utility as a professional development mechanism. It really helps us as attorneys, stay on our feet and keep fresh. Next point, positive volunteer experiences with COVID-19 projects, I think, should confirm for attorneys the value in stepping outside their usual practice area comfort zones. And that experience should then help inform the choices that grow professional capacities. So in other words, the hope here is that doing good COVID-19 pro bono is not just going to help clients to meet their legal needs, but will actually help us as professionals to grow. Sort of related to that is that the sheer breadth of the pandemic and its still unfolding legal fallout is sure to create new practice areas. So again, there's the whole, CARES Act expertise is sort of a new, micro area that people can focus on. But, both in terms of legal services practices and also just commercial practices generally, a lot of law firms are rolling out new practice areas and practice guides, that offers the potential for cross-fertilization of talent and expertise, between the private bar, legal services organizations, and the clients who are served by them. And then lastly, I think, to the extent that the profession steps up to the pro bono call of this new era and it's well managed, lawyers are going to grow in both competence and compassion. And at a time that is so dark, like the one we're living in, that we can't underestimate the importance of that. So there's some of the things that I hope will inform our reflections as we look at next steps. So happy to be sharing this presentation, and thanks very much everyone for being here.
Thanks, Kurt. There are a couple of questions that I just wanted to get to really quickly because they're, I think, pretty specific to some of what you talked about. One person wanted to know how they can volunteer for the hotline. Do you have that information that we could share with everyone?
Yes, I can. I will share just in terms of framing expectations. Like I said, we have over 1,000 attorneys who have signed up for our work. So we can't guarantee, matches in all places, but I'll, you know what I'll do, actually, I'll just share my email address. That's the easiest way to get information about that. So I'll put that in the chat.
Thank you. And then two other questions came up about how you're executing life planning documents and if you're using e-notarization for the free life planning legal assistance program.
Right. Yeah. So that was a challenge when that project was initially set up. How is it all going to work? In New York State, there need to be witnesses to a will. There's a notarization requirement. So Governor Cuomo did issue an executive order relatively early in the pandemic, loosening. Well, I shouldn't say loosening, just changing those requirements so that notarization could be done remotely. The requirements are, we're seeing this actually in the marriage context as well. People are able to get married online. And it does require, that you're confirming that you're in the state where you, in our case, it would be New York. You're presenting your identification, saving wet signature documents, and so forth. But those were some of the things we had to work through in setting up these projects in the first place. Yes.
Thank you very much, Kurt. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Steve. And there are some more questions coming in. And just to remind everyone, we are going to get to some of those just at the very end of the program, because some of them that are coming in are pretty relevant that I think everyone could contribute to. So we'll go ahead and hear from Stephen. Thank you.
Thought I'd unmuted. Thanks so much. I'm Steve Schulman. I'm the pro bono partner at AKIN GUMP and also the co-president of the Association of Pro Bono Counsel. I'm going to briefly talk today about kind of what it's like, the inside view of managing a pro bono practice initially during this pandemic. Michael and Kurt and Cheryl told you a lot about great opportunities that are out there. I'm not going to repeat a lot of those. I'll refer to them. But I wanted to let you know what it's like for those of us who manage pro bono practices. As I mentioned, I'm the co-president of the Association of Pro Bono Counsel. It's an organization that's been around for 14 years and now has 266 members who are partners, counsel, and coordinators of law firm pro bono practices around the world. We are present in 113 law firms around 11 countries in the world. And we communicate quite often about various issues that affect the delivery of pro bono legal services. And often those communications have been around disasters. Not surprisingly, we have responded to a lot of the floods that came around in the UK, the Grenfell Towers, fires, going all the way back to Superstorm Sandy. And I think as Kurt mentioned, the current pandemic was one where we were all affected by it, obviously. And so our first mission as we were faced with lockdown and with remote work was, how do we secure our existing pro bono clients? And that was a huge challenge for all of us, just like to secure our commercial clients. Of course, on the pro bono side, it's even more difficult because a lot of those clients do not have access to phones or email or other things. So we made an initial effort to make sure that every one of our pro bono clients had contact from the firm and that we were able to secure those. And then secondly was reaching out to our public interest partners. And this goes back to what Kurt was saying about the CARES Act, for example. Many of the public interest partners we work with, ones like, for example, Refugees International, to give you an example, required immediate help for what are our liabilities in operating remotely? How do we deal with our employees? What kind of requirements can we make? And then the CARES Act comes out, and there were a number of clients that wanted to make claims under the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program. We advised several clients on those, and a lot of law firms have done that as well. And so I think that goes to what Kurt was saying about the intersection of our commercial work and our pro bono work have in a lot of ways very much married here, where we have been able to use really the high level expertise that we are giving to our commercial clients, our Fortune 500 clients. We are giving that exact expertise to legal aid agencies and other nonprofits around the country. And then what secondarily came out of that response was remote work. Now, I mentioned obviously just all of us going remotely and trying to figure out how to work remotely, but then what projects were already available remotely, as opposed to responding to the pandemic specifically, and Kurt talked about some of those. But there are other things that we have done remotely for a long time. I'm helping clients fill out asylum applications. And especially now with Remain in Mexico, there are programs out there to help clients who are in Mexico through WhatsApp fill out asylum applications. Secondarily, working with veterans on military discharge upgrade petitions. That there's a program through Veterans Consortium that's always been done remotely. It's a program where the clients are all over the country and lawyers connect with them by phone and by email to get their discharges upgraded so that they no longer have a dishonorable discharge, but have at least a general discharge that allows them some VA benefits. And then, as Kurt mentioned, we got to work on how do we respond to the legal issues coming out of the crisis. And those I'll put into a couple of different categories. One is small business advising. I saw one of the questions earlier about pro bono qualifications, I think was a question that was posted. And I think a lot of the law firms have looked at this and said, this is an emergency. If a small business is coming to us through a pro bono clearinghouse to get legal assistance with an issue, we are pretty much assuming they need that on a pro bono basis if they don't have a lawyer otherwise to go to. And so I think a lot of firms are not looking at, especially at the small business advisory, as one where we are worried too much about the income of the business, given that so many businesses are under stress these days. There are small business initiatives in Houston, the Houston Small Business Legal Consultation. In New York, in addition to what Kurt mentioned, there's the Small Business Legal Relief Alliance, which has been spearheaded by Kevin Kern and Strook and Levon. LA, through Beit Tzedek, is setting up a small business advisory through something called LA Represents. And obviously those are ones, those small business advisories are ones where we again use our very specific legal expertise that we are giving to our commercial clients and using that to give to these new pro bono clients. A second category of pro bono has been release of prisoners and detainees. As you know, the prisons in our country and detention centers in our country are seen as essentially, what's the word I'm looking for? Sitting targets, sitting ducks for COVID-19. And thankfully, in late 2018, under the First Step Act, compassionate release petitions were authorized in federal court. And so we've seen a lot of compassionate release petitions be filed. Washington Lawyers Committee in Washington is coordinating a federal program. And just a few weeks ago, advocates convinced the District of Columbia to pass its own compassionate release law. I'll divert here for a moment just because it's one of my favorite public interest and social justice topics. And that is, many of you may not know that if you commit a crime in the District of Columbia, and it's not a federal crime, but a local crime, and you are convicted then of that crime in the Superior Court of the District of Columbia, you are remanded to the Federal Bureau of Prisons. The District of Columbia actually has no prison system. Because you are in the Bureau of Prisons, you are then a federal prisoner, and you are subject to being placed anywhere in the country. So we, law firms in Washington, D.C. often represent clients in parole proceedings as far away as California. Essentially, if you commit a crime in the District of Columbia, you are not only subject to a sentence, you are subject to effective exile within the United States. Because though the District of Columbia prisoners are in the federal system, but they are not federal prisoners, they were not covered under the First Step Act compassionate release. Secondarily, because the District of Columbia has no governor, the mayor does not have commutation powers. So unlike in some states where the mayor could either, or the governor, sorry, could either commute a sentence or grant compassionate release, the mayor could not do that. Well, that was revised by the District of Columbia. And now there's a project getting off the ground to allow for compassionate release, which would be petitions to the Superior Court to allow individuals who meet certain criteria, certain length of sentence that they have served, and other conditions, medical conditions specifically, that will allow them compassionate release. And then third, there are what I would, the planning documents is a big project around the country. Wills and powers of attorney that a lot of firms have signed up to do. And then finally, things like unemployment and other applications for benefits around the country. And then we're thinking about what the next wave is, of course. The next wave, I think we all anticipate a big one is going to be evictions. Thankfully, almost every jurisdiction with which I'm familiar has stayed evictions during the pandemic, but as states start to get back to business, one of those acts of business will be evicting people from their homes, unfortunately. And we are going to need substantial resources there. And I think the kind of creativity that Kurt was talking about is going to happen because even in a place like the District of Columbia, where there are more lawyers than people, we have, that was intentional, by the way. We have about 90+% of low-income tenants go unrepresented in our courts here, and obviously around the country, that number is likely higher. And so I think a lot of what we are envisioning is making sure that we are taking the best of this remote work and making sure that we are able to represent people not just in our local communities, but all around the country as well, and provide them with legal services. So let me pause there. I know that we have a number of questions and we have some other discussion we want to have.
Thanks, Steve. So I think one of the questions that I know is related to some things that have come in. What are each of you doing right now as far as attorney recruitment, and how are you dealing with some of the limited capacity that attorneys might have right now to find time for pro bono or to have the ability to do pro bono?
It's a great question, Marissa, and I think it's one that in the APBCO community we continue to talk about because it is a challenge. First, I think most of us at law firms can consider ourselves relatively lucky that we can do most of our work remotely. Certainly much more, we're able to work much more remotely now than, as was mentioned before, than we would have been even 5-10 years ago. And so, but still we have attorneys who have become, where before they had childcare providers or kids in school, are their primary childcare providers. And so one of the things we are looking at is how to put together teams where we are working not just across within an office, but across the entire law firm to ensure that people have the support to work with each other. But I think ultimately it's a challenge we're dealing with and actively. And I am in talks not just internally at AKIN GUMP, but within the Association of Pro Bono Counsel about how do we motivate people in a time where pro bono is perhaps not offering exactly something different than it used to offer. You know, back in the old days of February 2020, when Kurt was having a clinic at the bar center, someone would say, "Oh, I look forward to going to the clinic because it gets me out of the office and I get to walk down there in Midtown and, you know, stroll outside a little bit and maybe see somebody face to face and get that kind of experience. And now, frankly, what we're offering is somewhat more of the same. Get back in front of your computer, do this additional thing for an hour. And I think we have to figure out how to deal with that, because it isn't the same. Not that pro bono was attractive because it was a diversion exactly, but I think in people's brains it was, okay, yeah, I'm happy to do that. It also gives me something out of the office, gives me something different. And now what we're offering is yet another chance to sit in front of your computer for half an hour or an hour when there are other things to do, like Tiger King and Tiger King, so April. But I don't know what the May equivalent of Tiger King is. The fads seem to go even quicker in quarantine these days.
And I would just add to that, I think the other challenge that we're facing right now is there's just so much unknown, there's so much uncertainty, and there's so much variation in what everyone is experiencing. And so, you know, I think early on, it seemed that everyone kind of had all this free time. And so there was people, you know, eager to work. I think some of that was less about there being the work for them to do and more about us all not being accustomed to not being in the office and working remotely. And as we've eased into this over now a couple months, you know, to some degree that workflow is there and people don't have the free time. Then you look at folks who are solo and small firm, and they're worried about keeping the lights on and paying their paralegal or their legal assistant. You know, we had one person in one of our areas that we work who, you know, was talking about their paralegal and legal assistant have been with them for, you know, 35 plus years and just worried about whether or not they're going to be able to continue to provide them with a paycheck. So I think a certain level of sensitivity and understanding needs to be applied. And kind of a not one size fits all approach in trying to recruit, because then there are those other issues that Steve mentioned, like, you know, people who before relied on daycare and or schooling and now have their children with them and they're trying to be good parents while also being good lawyers and good citizens. And so I do think that there's a certain level of heightened sensitivity and awareness that we need to apply in terms of reaching out to and recruiting volunteers. And whereas, you know, in good days, we might be more inclined on the legal services side to add a little extra pressure / guilt. You know, now's kind of not the time for that. I think that people need to be left to be the best judge for what they can handle in light of all of what's going on. And Steve's other point about the sensitivity of, you know, all of us are spending a lot of time in front of a camera, you know, doing meetings and or trainings, you know, or whatever. And then when the volunteer stuff that used to appeal to other aspects of your interest and commitment become very similar, it does run the risk that our days become very monotonous. So I think there's a lot to think about as we do it that requires some thoughtfulness and some sensitivity.
Yeah, I think they're all good points. And without question, one of the benefits of pro bono is that, you know, as Steve described it, that social dimension, you know, people getting outside of their office, meeting clients, you know, being with different colleagues, you know, outside their usual practice group. So that's a challenge now. One of the things that I have found, you know, kind of interesting is in the clinical context, there often are partnerships between, you know, attorneys that say at a law firm and a corporate legal department where there's a business relationship. And those are often very successful, you know, pro bono endeavors, because in addition to the good work that's being done, you're developing and sort of cementing, you know, professional ties and personal ties. It's just good to see someone, you know, outside the context of the office. So on the one hand, that's a challenge that's problematized when we're all, you know, in our own homes. On the other hand, I think, you know, and we've seen it a little bit with our small business project where some of those same partnerships are still happening. It's an option. It's an, you know, opportunity to connect with, a colleague at another firm or, at an in-house department or what have you, that can be, can actually be very refreshing. And I think also just the experience of connecting with clients. Again, we've just started surveying people involved in our small business project, both the volunteer attorneys and the clients, and very not surprising, but it's heartening to see how many positive comments from both sides, the volunteers and the attorneys. It was so good to speak with someone. It meant so much that this person took time out of their day. There is something about pro bono that helps us, just step outside of our skin and our usual, kind of our usual habitat, even if we're stuck in our usual habitat, that can be, I think, very healthy. The one part that's an additional challenge there, and this was actually shared on a call earlier today, the Pro Bono Legal Services Committee of the New York City Bar Association. I think, many lawyers were very comfortable with the video technology. We have that capacity. But a few of my legal services colleagues were mentioning that many of their clients who are in very vulnerable situations either simply don't have that capacity, or even if they do, they're not comfortable with it. So that's an area where, again, cultural competence, cultural humility becomes really important. Just that we're sensitive that technology, at some level, it's an equalizer, but at another level, technology shows the divides that exist in our society, and we just have to be able to be flexible and be mindful of that.
Great, thank you. Steve, there have been a couple questions that came in about firms and if there's going to be any impact on pro bono engagement level from any possible layoffs, and if there's been any discussion about deferring incoming associates and giving them a stipend to go work, or seconding staff attorneys to go work for their nonprofit partners. And I know that, Michael, you have a little bit of insight into this too, because this was something that happened previously. So if you could go ahead and discuss that, Steve.
Sure. So certainly at APBCO, we've already started discussions and have a small task force looking at the issue of deferred associates. I think many firms have decided that associates are going to start sometime around January of 2021. So we're not seeing exactly the same type of deferral as we were seeing in 2009, 2010, when people were deferred for about a year. So one of the questions we are asking ourselves as pro bono practice leaders and as leaders within our firms is whether we really should be pushing our deferred associates for just a few months, when they might actually be taking the bar during that time as well, to go into public interest. We know that putting volunteers into public interest requires resources too. And so one of the things we're looking at is what were the lessons learned in 2009 and 2010, and trying to make sure we aren't assuming that deferred associates sent to public interest organizations is actually the best use of a resource. The second question I'll say, luckily there have not been a substantial number of associate layoffs, nothing like we saw in 2008, 2009. And fingers crossed we won't see that, that as the economy starts to open back up, we'll realize this was not a defect in the economy, it was a defect in our public health system perhaps. But that and I don't mean to look at this with rose-colored glasses. I certainly realize there's a lot of economic harm out there. But I think what we are seeing so far at firms is that demand is not expected to be way off where we have to engage in substantial layoffs. And so I think we will still have a fair amount of pro bono engagement. To go back to numbers in 2008, 2009, 2010, we had the highest number of pro bono hours ever from the AmLaw 200 firms because there was excess capacity. What actually worries me a little bit, and one of the first emails I sent out when we went into kind of lockdown mode, was to lawyers saying, if you have something that's due in 6 months, do it now, please, because I don't know when we get back to the office, whatever that means now. And I was somewhat naive back then, thinking maybe in 3 months or over the summer, we'd be all back together. I don't think that is what anyone envisions the rest of the year. But courts are going to start to figure out how to do litigation, and litigation is going to come back, and litigation in some ways can be very big, and bankruptcy is going to be big, and we are going to, what my worry is as a pro bono partner, not necessarily as a partner in the firm whose income depends on the firm, but as someone who managed the pro bono practice, that we'll have the opposite of that. We will actually have people super busy, and also I think busier because they'll be adjusting to new ways that courts are operating and different things. Actually, it's going to take a little bit more time, perhaps. So there's a lot of, and I think Michael said, there's a lot of unknowns going forward, and I think we all have to be flexible about it. But what I am very optimistic about is that we do have a generation of lawyers, generation plus. I don't mean the generation that's coming in, but pro bono is one of those things that is expected at most law firms now. Most lawyers expect that they are going to do pro bono work, and I think in times when pro bono is particularly needed, lawyers do step up, and I'm optimistic about that.
Michael, did you want to contribute anything to talk about kind of the adjustments to that, or any deferrals compared to the 2010 model?
Yeah, I think, I agree with everything Steve said. I think there are certainly lessons to be learned from 2008 to 2010. But I do think fundamentally they are two very different situations. I also think in 2008-10, the scale, the depth was very different than what we're looking at right now. And so at least initially, and again, things evolve and change. So check back with Steve and I in 2 months and we'll see, if we think the same to be true then. But, the periods of times that we are hearing about here at Pili are much smaller than the times we were looking at back then. And I do think that that's part of the analysis. When we looked at this in 2008 to 10, there were a lot of concerns about what it meant for agencies to basically onboard a whole new employee, and oftentimes without, much new resource or support to do that. Now add in on top of that still existing question, the fact that it may need to be for some or all of it remotely done, and other aspects like that. So I think there are, again, things to look at from then to learn from and to plan for, to the extent that we might see some similarities. But again, if Steve and I are right that this was less about a weakened economy and more about a public health crisis, then the time period and the extent to which it goes, I think could be very different. And I do think that what we saw then, notwithstanding the deferment piece, but at least in terms of engagement, was pro bono was definitely up and people were looking to do it. And I think the point that both Kurt and Steve made here that comes into play is the broadness with which this affects all of us, and how that calls people, I think, into being committed to helping in this time, because we all know some aspect of this touching us in some way, as opposed to a terrible, weather-related crisis happening somewhere, but not directly impacting me when I look out the window. And so I think that there are similarities, but there are big differences between the two. We are certainly seeing some layoffs. We certainly are seeing some deferments, but nothing in volume and scale or length to what we saw the last time around. And I think it's still too early to know whether or not that's going to change at this point.
A couple of questions have come in that I would like to direct to all of you. How can law students get involved and participate in some of these initiatives?
Sure, I can take that. To be candid, it's a challenge right now for law students. Speaking at least for ourselves, we worked very hard to preserve our existing summer intern program. I know a lot of other organizations did, and we've certainly gotten inquiries from firms or from law students themselves whose internships have kind of dried up. And the real challenge is, even though the client needs are increasing, because of just the sort of the additional logistical dimensions of working remotely, it's really difficult, at least for legal services organizations, to kind of take on more people than we had already planned to take on. So unfortunately, I think it's a difficult environment for law students. There's no question. And the reason for that is because the supervision that needs to be in place for the work, you have to have the attorneys able to to do that. And when it's remote, it's more challenging. But I had a conversation with a student just yesterday who is interested in public interest law, in the future. And what I stressed to her was, it's such a unique moment in our history, and it's a learning moment. So I think anything that anyone is able to do, to sort of learn by what's happening, whether that means doing a research project or reaching out to, an elected official and say, is there anything I can help, in terms of constituent needs, in your office. If you're thinking about what's going to make you a better lawyer, or if you're an undergrad thinking about what's going to make me a better, law school prospect, it's just showing responsiveness to the needs. And people are going to understand that this was a really tough summer. Not everyone is going to be able to be employed. But anything that you're able to do to show, thoughtfulness and commitment, in my experience, the best lawyers are lawyers who are very well-rounded and have done different kinds of, work experiences. So I wouldn't be too afraid about kind of stepping outside of some of the more obvious boxes, in terms of summer experience.
From the legal answer standpoint, I'll just say that so in order to actually be a registered volunteer on the site and to submit answers to questions, you do have to be an attorney, either an active and fully licensed attorney in good standing, or if you have a state rule like we do here in Illinois that allows people who are retired or inactive to still do pro bono work without having to pay for a fully active license. Then those folks can all do it through us, but you have to be one of them to submit an answer. That said, before this, we saw pairings of paralegal and lawyer, or law student and lawyer working together, where the paralegal or lawyer might help draft the question or do the research or look into things, and then kind of prepare an answer that the attorney reviews, signs off on, and then actually submits. And that works very well. The key to that is the lawyer needs to go ahead and take that question out of the queue, so that while the paralegal or law student is working on it, somebody else doesn't come along and answer the question and take it away from them. You've got a couple days where you can reserve that question and hold it back from the queue before it gets returned into the queue if you haven't actually submitted an answer. So that is something that can be done at any time, on an individual basis. We have seen law schools offer free legal answers clinics in Illinois and in elsewhere, where either alumni are the lawyer partner that the student is working with, or where it's part of a class and the clinical professors or the professor teaching that course is the one who ultimately reviews and submits the answers to the questions. We've actually been in talks with some of the law schools here in Illinois to offer some kind of a situation like that, where they're creating either new clinical programs or pandemic related efforts to try to provide additional legal services. So there are ways to do it. It just always has to be in partnership with an attorney who is licensed and able to be the one to be registered and submit the question into the system.
Yeah, and to follow on to Mike's comments, we've seen across the United States law schools doing those clinics with free legal answers and pairing up with attorneys. Other opportunities that are really good for both law students and paralegals who are very similar in the constraints on their ability to provide legal work are research, obviously, and drafting documents and interviewing clients. So I suspect that as pro bono providers start to look at the legal issues that are arising out of the pandemic and the surge of cases that are going to eventually come up when the courts reopen. They're going to be very creative about integrating law students and paralegals into the provision of pro bono legal services, because engaging those folks to support attorneys will allow them to provide more services. And we know we're going to be looking at a lot more clients than we typically would, just based on the number of folks who are unemployed at present.
And let me just pull on one thing that is a common thread in all these comments, which is that we need sufficient funding of legal services in order to provide pro bono service. Pro bono service just doesn't pop out whole from a law firm for the most part. Occasionally more it does than before, but certainly not much. Thankfully, under the CARES Act, there was $50 million provided to Legal Services Corporation for COVID-related legal aid. That's of course not enough, but it's something. And they were able to quickly distribute that to their LSC grantees. There's another $50 million that has been proposed in the HEROES Act, which is the latest act that has the bill that's been put forth by the Democrats on the Hill. And so one of the things that I think is very important as lawyers that we do is realize that it's not either or money or pro bono. It's the money supports the pro bono or supports the people that support pro bono. As Kurt said, there's only so much supervision to go around. And that is, I think that is somewhat of the bottleneck that we have right now, even, is that, the more legal aid lawyers we have, the more pro bono will get done. And so we need to make sure to keep our eye on that ball as well.
Thanks, Steve. And I'm going to use that to seg into some questions that we had. People posed a question in the chat about getting training for pro bono. Your local legal services and pro bono providers will typically offer both CLE and non-CLE training, as well as mentoring and support for cases. We have a National Pro Bono Opportunities Guide. It is located on our website at abaprobono.org. You can reference that guide to identify an organization near you that provides pro bono legal services. And they will, as I said, typically offer training and support for attorneys, especially if you're new to an area of law. If you've never done eviction before, for example, they will help you out with that. We also had a question about CLE through the ABA. And there is frequently a cost associated with those CLEs, but there are many free CLEs available as well. One of the best ways to get access to the CLEs is to become a member. For people who are engaged in public interest or nonprofit work, membership is fairly affordable at $150 a year. And so getting access to CLEs for that amount annually is a fairly good cost benefit analysis, let's say. But I'll also mention that the ABA is a leader in advocating for funding for legal services. And as Steve mentioned, that's very critical, both to provide staffed representation of folks and to provide the pro bono management and services for pro bono attorneys. So it supports the ABA's efforts in that aspect, as well as supporting my colleagues in the Center for Public Interest who work on issues such as immigration, domestic violence, and homelessness. So I would encourage you to think about becoming an ABA member as well and getting the many benefits and CLEs that are associated with that membership.
Thank you, Cheryl. So I think we may have time for one more question. One of the questions that it seems I know came up pretty early and I think is a pretty continuous thread is what is happening to some of the more traditional pro bono legal clinics right now that obviously that more traditional in the sense that they provide direct legal services. So how are programs adapting to that and continuing with those programs?
Sure, I'm happy to take that. We are at the City Bar Justice Center. We're continuing our, kind of our bread and butter work. And again, that's a reason why the pro bono response now needs to be a marathon, not a sprint, because there are all these existing legal needs that are still there. So, a lot of that has been adapted. So to use the example, that was posed earlier, fortunately, notarization rules have been, revised. So that allows us to do some of that work. Frankly, partnerships with law firms in particular are very helpful because of the technology that's able to be brought to bear. But some of what we're looking at is, how we'll transition, if this continues into the fall, how we'll transition some of those large scale clinics. So it's using Zoom, it's using WebEx, it's also putting together, we've done, I know a lot of other providers have done, we've adjusted our volunteer agreement to, include some points on being thoughtful about, conducting remote pro bono. If you're not conducting pro bono from your office, but you're doing it in your living room, what are some of the ethical considerations you need to take into account? So all of it's being adapted, but I would say that the, kind of the existing pro bono continues, and those services are absolutely still needed.
I think from our perspective, so Free Legal Answers is just one of our pro bono opportunities. We have several other pro bono opportunities that are more traditional direct service. And so with those, we continue to, get referrals and place cases with volunteers. We have still had a great response from folks on that side too. So I agree with everyone's kind of concern that the risk of these great bite-sized opportunities is a loss of focus or a loss of commitment to the longer term cases. Happily, we have not seen that be an issue. And so, to some degree, it's kind of like it always looked before and was before. It might be more on the phone or more virtual. But with courthouses shut down, it's also kind of hurry up and then pause as you kind of wait for things to kick back in. And so we're still seeing that. And then there's other things that, were meant to be live that had to be switched to virtual. So we were working with one of our partners, a local bar association in DuPage County, to do an expungement summit right before this all happened. It was supposed to be held in person on April 25th. And so we worked with the DCBA and with our other partner in that, Prairie State Legal Services, to turn that into a virtual clinic so that we could still get all of the people help, provide counseling, and then for those for whom we could actually get a petition filed, get that all ready so that when we emerge out of the court closure piece of the pandemic, we can get those filed and still get the help to those in need. So I think it's a little bit of, some of it's just like it's always been, and then others, we're having to be creative and be innovative. And I will admit, I put myself into this category of, we in legal aid sometimes are not the most ready to embrace technology. 2 months ago, if you told me we were going to have a Zoom, I would have gotten my binder clip and put it over my camera. And so, I think the good news is none of us had the luxury to say technology isn't my thing. We've had to do it. And so I think that there's been an adaptation out of this that I'll count as one of the silver linings, and that it's making us all a bit more innovative and creative about how we continue to serve those in need.
All right, thank you. Well, we are out of time, so I just want to thank everyone for joining us for this free webinar, and thank you to our esteemed group of panelists. All of you really are doing such critical work, and we thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to share your experiences. And I just wanted to remind everyone that the section provides free webinars and resources for legal professionals and advocates nationwide. And the Standing Committee on Pro Bono Public Service and the Center for Pro Bono are here to provide technical assistance and support. You can find our resources by visiting abaprobono.org, and we hope this helps you in your work. If you can please consider joining and becoming active in the ABA, you may do so at ambar.org/CRSJ. And we also hope that you would consider making a charitable gift to support our work in protecting and advancing human rights, civil liberties, and social justice at ambar.org/donate-CRSJ and americanbar.org/groups/pro bono public service. You can find information on other free programs on the CRSJ webpage and the Standing Committee for Pro Bono and Public Service page. So best of luck in your work and stay safe, everyone. and have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you very
everyone.
much.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Be well. Thank you.
Bye-bye.